In Python, how can you check whether two iterables are equal? If we have two lists and we wanted to know whether the items in these two lists are the same, we could use the equality operator. The same thing works for comparing tuples. But what if we wanted to compare a list and a tuple? We can't use a simple equality check for that. To compare the items in a list with the items in a tuple, we could convert the list to a tuple or the tuple to a list and then check for equality. This approach could also work for comparing any other type of iterable. For example, we have two chain objects here, and these chain objects are iterables, but they're also iterators, and the equality operator doesn't work very well with iterators. If we loop over these two chain objects, we would see that they have the same items within them. So we could convert each of them to a list before we compare them. And that works. Converting two iterables to a list or a tuple before we compare them does work, but if we're comparing two very large iterables, and those iterables would usually differ in their first few elements when they are different, this type of comparison would take more memory and more time than is necessary. For example, maybe we're comparing two files that are usually either completely the same or they differ within the first few lines. We could read the whole file into memory all at once, and then compare each of them. Or we could use the zip function with the strict equals true argument to compare line by line in a for loop. This style of checking for a non-matching value, setting a boolean, and breaking from a loop is actually what Python's any and all functions were designed to handle. So we could do the same thing by using a generator expression and the built-in all function. Either way, we're looping over each file line by line, comparing each line to make sure they're equal, and then discarding previous lines after we're done comparing them, and stopping as soon as we find an unequal line. That's pretty nifty. This all and zip approach can also be adapted to check for near equality. For example, maybe we're comparing two CSV files and we only care whether the first column of every row matches in the file. This zip all style of comparison works well if you don't care about the types of the iterables you're comparing. You only care whether they have the same items in the same order. Speaking of order, all of these approaches so far assume that the order of the two iterables is significant. What if you need to compare two iterables while ignoring the order of their items? Well, if the items are strings, numbers, or other hashable objects, then you could put the two iterables in sets and check whether those sets are equal. If your iterables might repeat items, and repeats are significant, then you could use collections.counter. The sorted function would work as well if your items are orderable, but sorting is a slower process than adding items to a counter object, so I would prefer using counter over sorting. In Python, we love duck typing, which means we often care about the behavior of an object more than the type of that object. Because of that, it's common to write code that works with lists, but also works with other types of iterables. So sometimes checking whether two iterables have the same items involves more than a simple equality check.